Good tidings, ladies and gentlemen of the lodge, and welcome back. Today's topic is bound to be a wild one, as we are discussing two characters who need no introduction, Vanitas and the Master of Masters. However, before we dive into the title topic, allow me to give out a little context. For those of you who may be new around here, the videos that got my channel off the ground were my Sins of the Foretellers series. In those videos shown on your screen, I went over how every foreteller is named after one of the 7 deadly sins, and in those videos, we went over how those sins manifested themselves through the characters' words and actions. However, you may notice that one particular sin is missing, the sin of pride. Now, of course, immediately we think of the Master of Masters, but given that we don't know his real name yet, we do not know if he will be named after the sin of pride, and until we do, I won't be making said video. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it is a very strong possibility that the Master could be named after the sin of pride, but there has been another suspect on my list as to who it could be that's made me very apprehensive to assume the Master would be the one to be named after the sin of pride. And that suspect is none other than Vanitas. So let's start with the usual here. His name. Vanitas' name is a direct translation to the Latin word for vanity. Vanity, which could be defined as excessive pride in one's appearance, qualities, abilities, achievements, etc. Character or quality of being vain or conceit. So not only does vanity itself embody excessive pride, but the word can be used synonymously with pride as well. That said, it is important to note that there is a difference between pride and vanity. As we just went over, vanity is an example of a certain type of pride that is selfish and vain by nature, whereas the word pride can embody both this vain example as well as a more benevolent or selfless pride. For example, like being proud of your friend's accomplishments. I'm looking at you, Sora. You guys starting to see the parallels? So, we might have a case where you have Sora who sort of embodies this more benevolent pride, and then you might have Vanitas who embodies this more malevolent pride. Anyway, here we are, where the Foretellers are all named after one of the 7 deadly sins, and with the Master's name a mystery, we have one sin left vacant. And little did we all know that there was a character whose name reflected the sin of pride all along, Vanitas. So seeing as the naming scheme parallels the Foretellers, it's time to move on to our next point. Secondly, in order for this theory to hold its ground, we would have to connect Vanitas to the Master of Masters. This actually turned out to be easier than I thought. Right away, we can see the Master, at the very least, is watching over Vanitas when we simply look at his Keyblade. We can see the Master's gazing eye is present twofold, allowing the Master to observe all of Vanitas' actions and jot them into the Book of Prophecies. And seeing as we now know the Master's plan is directly involving darkness, and seeing as how this is how Vanitas identifies himself,
what I am is darkness.
We can't help but wonder if the two are connected. Also, seeing as Ventus is from the Master of Masters' time in Daybreak Town, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say, given the Book of Prophecies, that the Master of Masters knew exactly who Ventus was, what his fate would be, and what his role would be in the era of birth by sleep. After all, the Master of Masters used Xehanort like a scapegoat to achieve what he wanted. I'm willing to bet he had something to do with Xehanort's plan in extracting the darkness out of Ventus' heart. After all, as stated before, because of the gazing eye in Vanitas' Keyblade, you could argue that the Master was using Vanitas as a way to monitor Xehanort and his plans in Birth by Sleep. If this is sounding familiar to any of you, allow me to introduce my next point. If we are under the assumption that the Master of Masters played a large hand in Vanitas' fate, You'd have to notice the parallels then between himself and Luxu. You would have a situation where every little thing that Xehanort did in Birth by Sleep was monitored or influenced by the Master's proxies, whether it be Luxu or Vanitas. They were both working very closely alongside Master Xehanort. Luxu was there to pass on and watch over the Master's Keyblade, as well as slowly guide Xehanort, whilst Vanitas was there to observe Xehanort with the gazing eyes on his Keyblade. Now, I'm not saying Vanitas was conscious of this, but he wouldn't need to be. The Master's eyes on the Keyblade are all he would need to get what he requires. Lastly, before we wrap this up, I think it's worth noting that both men were present for the final battle in Birth by Sleep, which took place in none other than the Keyblade Graveyard. Think about the eeriness when you have three villains, Xehanort, the Master's scapegoat, Luxu, the Master's apprentice, and Vanitas serving as the Master's observer. All three are here on the gravesite of the last Keyblade War that the Master essentially started, serving the will of that same man to reignite another Keyblade War. Look, do I still think there's a strong possibility that the Master's name will translate to pride? Of course I do. But I also think it's possible that his name is a derivative of things like light, as well, or maybe even darkness. But the thing is, if his name would turn out not to be a reflection of the word pride, it would leave a huge vacancy in the naming scheme of the Foretellers. And what if, after all this time, that vacancy was being filled all along and it was right under our noses? Wouldn't be the first time one of the Master's proxies hid right under our noses, now would it? Vanitas is a fascinating character, and Haley Joel Osment absolutely crushes it as his voice actor. I can only hope we will see more of him in the future. There's still so much mystery surrounding his character, and given his brief mention in Remind, I'm inclined to believe we will see him again. But my friends, both sickos and normies, what do you make of all of this? Be sure to let me know in the comments whether you agree, disagree, or believe there is anything I missed. And who knows, maybe we'll learn more about this in Dark Road, if it ever comes out! Sub to the channel if you want more Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy content. Be good to yourself, be good to each other, and I will see all of you beautiful sickos and normies next time.